Welcome to Wednesdays at the Carmel Foundation. It is March Women's History Month. Tillie Lewis, the most important woman you have never heard of. Now, why is that? Well, women in history seem to end up being buried along with their names. Well, today we're going to go ahead and uncover and bring back to life this amazing individual that took me an entire book to get through the beginning, the middle, and the end of this lady's life. So forgive me if I can't get to every single amazing thing she did in this afternoon. Tillie Lewis was the first female captain of industry in America. Now, what in the world is a captain of industry? Well, a captain of industry was a man who amassed his great fortune that eventually helped establish a positive situation for other people in the nation. A man. That's right. Tillie Lewis was the first woman to do such a thing. Now, I want you to think about the fact that we haven't forgotten who Wonder Woman is. Now, have we? Superheroes abound. We ask our girls to dress up for Halloween and other ideas as comic book characters when, yes, indeed, drop the cape and remember that women of true wonder like Tillie Lewis existed, and they existed with panache. Let's go ahead and think about that. As captain of industry, Tillie Lewis didn't wait to the end of her life to do wonderful things for humanity. Tillie Lewis began that way. She provided jobs based on character, is how she hired. It had nothing to do with race, faith, or gender. She hired for a quality human being. In the middle of the Great Depression, I might add. She increased productivity in the agriculture business. She fed people. And her acts of philanthropy, as I stated, began with her first moves. Tillie Lewis's life began in 1896 as the first American born to her Jewish immigrant family in Brooklyn, New York tenements. Now, and there's a little tomato that's on her dress. Please note, there's two places, I think, within this PowerPoint to show you who Tillie is. So Tillie's that little doll right there. Yes, she is. Now, Tillie's only worry in this world was about hunger. Children at Tillie's age in 1896 to the early 1900s, they worked for a living. They worked hard. You note the chimney sweeps that are in the picture here. Tillie was terrified that might happen to her because her mom, who you can see there, Rose, had tuberculosis, and she died only a few years later, leaving Tillie to be very concerned about what her future might bring. But fortunately, her father, while you can note that their shoes are scuffed and their outfits are tattered, he believed in education for his girls. Yes, he did. He believed that education would do something for them. So he earned just enough money, just enough to make a living. And that meant just to get by. But he sent his girls to school, and they went to school, and they both learned. Tillie learned math and science and physics. And her sister was a specialist in the arts, music, and boy, could that girl read. Tillie decided that doing what her sister chose to do, and that's become a wife and mother, and a wonderful wife and mother at that, Tillie decided she wanted something more exciting. So at 15, she went across the Brooklyn Bridge that you can see here from Brooklyn to Manhattan and she found a place called the Ziegfeld Follies. Now, for those of you that don't know what the Ziegfeld Follies are, well, it was like Hollywood. Those folks would become Hollywood eventually. Now, Tillie started, well, in Tillie's tenement, she was the cutest little thing as shoe leather. But at the Ziegfeld Follies, she found that she was more of a cutie than a beauty. But Tillie always had a philosophy that she was fine with pretty much whatever happened. And if she wasn't the prettiest, she'd be the smartest. So she went ahead and she found a gentleman friend named Florendo de Gaiso that she just thought was wonderful. And he was in agriculture, pretty much a prince in Italy. So that is who she focused on, while some of the other gals focused on, well, every guy in a tuxedo. Now, Tillie is standing in front of the Gould Mansion in her little outfit, and she's posing like she's posing with Ziegfeld. And you see the little tomato under her feet when she's on stage. No, it's 1911, so she's bobbed her hair a good 9 years before the 1920s when that became in vogue. She shocked her poor dad. My goodness. Then, again with Florendo de Gaiso, he swept her off to Italy and Paris, all sorts of places in Europe. She met lords and ladies. She ended up in Italy at his family agriculture center, and she learned a little bit about how to grow things like the San Marzano tomato. Now, if you have not had a San Marzano tomato, you have not lived. You need to go out and do that, because that's going to be an important story to Tillie Lewis, who becomes the tomato queen. Now, this is 1911 to 1914 early, because in 1914, World War I happens. World War I occurs, and Florendo de Gaiso cannot come back and visit his lady love. He is in Italy because in 1915, Italy goes ahead and joins with in the war. Now, in 1916, Tillie says she marries Louis Weisberg. Now, why did she do that? She's getting letters back from Del Gaiso that indicate that the war is going to eventually involve the United States. And she's working for her brother-in-law, who has an adorable little store. Now, they're marketing that. She's out of the Ziegfeld Follies, and she's working for the brother-in-law. And she's getting product from Italy through Florendo de Gaiso. So in 1916, she's getting these letters back and forth from Italy. She says she marries a friend of the family, Louis Weisberg. That is to keep Louis out of the war if it should come and the United States had to sign up. And that's what they did. So good friend Louis Weisberg is not going to have to go to war. And this is something that's positive for Tillie and the family. 1917, the war does encompass the United States. And the boys come home in 1918, and with them, they bring what we're pretty much going through now, and they bring the flu. Tillie catches that flu. Sam Hawkeiser, her brother-in-law, catches that flu. They nearly die. But they survive. And Tillie decides while she's lying there in her bed, recovering, she says, you know what? Our little grocery store is not surviving. And it doesn't. Like many of the small businesses we see today, Tillie's little business, her family business, suffers and passes away. While Tillie's lying in the bed, she says, you know, we have the Del Gaiso family to help us out when this thing is over and we feel better. So she says, let's go ahead and open wholesale. Let's forget this whole retail thing. Tillie's always thinking ahead. At this point in time, Tillie says, let's just go ahead and open a wholesale business from their house. Her brother-in-law says, it's impossible. Tillie said, let's give it a shot. So they flip a coin, and Tillie won. They opened a company called Mussolini Products, and they opened it in near the harbors where Del Gaizo's letters are saying, open that business, open that import-export Italian business where there's rail and water and road. And she does exactly that. And it's called Mussolini Products. And it was fabulous. So Tillie's got this fabulous business working, selling Italian and Jewish imports and exports. By the time the flu ends, the war ends, and Del Gaizo comes back, he takes Tillie back again to Italy. They have a wonderful time. And he's now telling her that she needs to learn to speak Italian. So she does. She learns to speak Italian fluently, French fluently. She's taking business classes. And she is in Italy conducting business with fascist leaders. Now remember, Mussolini is not a problem for the United States at this point in time. We're still friends and allies. So that is not an issue at this point. And note this lovely picture that happens to also be the cover of the book. This is Tillie in 1926, looking into the eyes of her lover, Florendo Del Gaizo, with passion. It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful scene where she is gazing at him. So they come back in 1926 to Manhattan, and they open Flow-Till Corporation. At this point in time, it's an agriculture business combined with the stock market, because in the 1920s, stock market's going crazy. So it's fabulous. Tillie does not have a license to sell because she is a woman, and they are few and far between licensed stockbrokers. So Tillie is asked by Del Gaizo to market stocks, and she does better than most men. So in 1920s, while the average man is making about $3,500 a year, Tillie herself, independent of Del Gaizo, is making $10,000 a year. She's a wealthy woman in and of herself. To add to it, she's aware that she's the girlfriend, not the wife. Del Gaizo was married, Catholic, and had 7 children. He is never going to marry Tillie, and she knows it. So she says, what else can I do? What could possibly be next? Let's do stocks and the egg business. So Del Gaizo says, why don't you think about where we could possibly grow San Marzano, fabulous Italian tomatoes, in the United States? Now, Tillie's a Brooklynite. There's the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, and you can see a picture of that. It's gorgeous. She goes and she's told by the experts, well, it can't be done. And Tillie says, nonsense. If French wine can be raised in the United States, so can the San Marzano tomato. And she researched, and she sat and she found that somewhere along the area of Stockton in San Joaquin County, California, she thought it was the same soil type, the same temperature. And Stockton had just dug out a deep water port. So you got rail, you've got the soil, you have everything that would be perfect to grow that San Marzano tomato. So Tillie goes ahead and says, I'll do that. Meanwhile, the stock market crashes. It's 1929, late 1929, crash, boom. The stock market has crashed. But they have the backup. However, the United States comes up with the Smoot-Hawley tariff, designed to assist American farmers and keep foreign products out of the country. Well, what the heck are they going to do? Tillie does again. She's a Wonder Woman. She's wondering, how do we resolve this? This is how you resolve it. She tells the Del Gaizo family, I am an American. I can bring the San Marzano seed. I can bring the products into America. All you have to do is make me the president of Flow-Till, and it will be done. So they did. So the first lady agriculture industrialist goes ahead and starts a company, Flow-Till, in Stockton, California. She hires only people of good character who will work as hard as she will. Now, I've read from other historians who stated that Tillie hired Hispanics and women because they were cheaper. Well, perhaps, but this was the Great Depression. And Tillie, no matter how you're going to look at it, is a woman. And men do not, in general, want to work for a woman. They've never heard of such a thing. Women didn't even work out their own finances at home, for goodness sake. So Tillie goes ahead and she asks people and men, will you come to work to help me? Imagine if your boss asked for help. Meanwhile, when she gets to Stockton, they don't like her very much. She's an oddball. She is a beautiful Jewish, she says she's a divorcee, and she's in furs and diamonds. This is not what Stockton was expecting. This is not what Stockton was expecting. So, Tillie had to dress down, learn how to be a Stocktonian, and she did it with style. Now, mind you, if you're looking at the picture where Tillie is sitting in her office, in her appropriate Stockton ensemble, there's a photograph of a gentleman on the wall. That is Florendo de Gaizo. This was her first arrest and the first investigation by the FBI. Some of her male workers who resented women and people of color being promoted went to the FBI and the police department and said they were being forced to come in on a daily basis and salute, and I will not do that for you because it's inappropriate, in a fascist style, a picture of Benito Mussolini. Well, that is Florendo de Gaizo, and she certainly never had anybody salute anybody in her office. But nonetheless, those were the things that were said about her. And from a historian's standpoint, it was delightful because the FBI had a file about this thick on Tillie by the time I got to enjoy it. They were watching her every move for years. So we know a lot about Tillie from the FBI, who finally decided that nobody was more American than Tillie Lewis, as American as apple pie, forget the tomatoes. Did I mention the tomatoes did fabulous? They did. They flourished. The stories about what happened and how it happened are throughout this book. So do please take a look at this book. In her second year, 1936, if anybody's ever felt the heat of Stockton, California in August when tomato season is really at its peak, well, her steam copper kettles blew. Well, it's quite popular now for executives to take a walk when it's time to have a think. But Tillie did it then. Tillie called them think walks then, and she went out in high heels and pearls because someone came up and said, Miss Tillie, the boilers have gone out. The boilers have gone out. Now it is a scalding hot day and the tomatoes are piled up. Tillie goes, okay, we're in trouble here. You need steam and you need the boilers to can tomatoes. So off she goes on her think walk, and she's stepping over the railroad track, and she's thinking and thinking, and she looked at the steam engine that came up on a spur right to her company door, and she thought, they run on steam. So she went inside her office, and she asked her gentlemen engineers and said, could we hook up one of the trains and produce steam to run our plant? And they said, I think so. I believe it's called shunting. So they called the Standard Pacific and said, could we get a train out here? Yes. How much does it cost? $7. Tillie said, I'll take 2. And she saved the season. Now this made her a solid entity with all of the grower men in the area. She went from being a bit of fluff that wasn't going to make the season to being somebody that was respected among canners in the industry. Now, at this point in time, Tillie's decided she loves San Joaquin County. She's a New Yorker and she's now a Stocktonian. She thinks it's marvelous, but she's back on the what's next deal, and she's thinking, we're just canning tomatoes. That's it. There's fabulous fruits everywhere in San Joaquin County, so she wants to can more. And Del Gaizo says no, absolutely not. He's not going to do it. He's making enough money. This is just fine with him. Don't mess with, don't. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. So Tillie convinces him to at least think about it. So they go off, and you can see a picture of Tillie with her not quite husband, Sam, brother Lou Weisberg. And on the other side is Lorenzo Del Gaizo in his hat, not looking very happy. And they are off to Italy for another visit and trip while they discuss the bottom line of growing and getting bigger. Del Gaizo is not happy. So Del Gaizo dies. Yeah. So it's 1937, and Mr. Del Gaizo, Lorenzo Del Gaizo, has passed away. First thing, while Tillie is grieving, and you can see the casket in Naples at the Duomo in Italy. I mean, his funeral was fabulous. I mean, it was a magnificent event. However, Tillie's money is pulled here in the United States because banks are not going to loan to a woman that doesn't have a man backer. Not going to do it. So Tillie is told by the local banks, there are no more loans for you, Tillie, because you're a woman and you might just get a feminine headache. So off she goes, not distressed. She's still determined. She goes to New York and she asks the Bank of Napoli for a loan. And they granted her one. And the gentleman that gave her the loan, his name was Claude Young. And she said, thank you so much, Mr. Young. And if there's ever a time where you need or want anything at all, ever, let me know. And I shall grant your wish if I could possibly do it. Well, when World War II comes about, he calls and says, I need a job. They closed his bank. And she said, your tickets and your apartment is rented for you. Go on down to the train station and pick everything up. So Tillie's going back to Stockton, and she's got money to run the next season. So rather than be ashamed of the fact that Del Gaizo is dead and that a woman is running things, she brags about it. Tillie decides to make another great positive. Here is a company run by a woman for women. It's saying, housewives, ladies that are cooking for your families, I'm going to make the best product ever, and I know what you need, and I know what you want to put on the table for your family. I know exactly what you're looking for. And that goes over huge. The women of America want to buy from a woman. They simply do. They absolutely do. At which point, there's a picture there of Tillie older, standing next to two workers on a can line. But Tillie did that all the time, from the time she was a young woman on. When she wasn't think walking, she would go down and can tomatoes alongside, elbow to elbow, with her ladies. And part of that was she got the gossip. She would say, so what's going on? Who's getting married? Who's doing what? Who's getting divorced? She would find these things out, and she would reward, or she would change, or she would alter the company from the gossip she heard. She also heard that women who were established and had longer time on the job were taking the best tomatoes and getting paid more. Tillie set up a system where everybody got an equal chance at canning the best tomatoes, at picking them at the right time. She made sure that her system was fair to everyone. Long term, Short term, the ladies were equal. Then strikes started to happen. So Tillie created the most comprehensive, positive towards her employees union contract in the United States, which got the attention of the Federation, William Green of the Federation of Unions, to reward her with other contracts from the government, because this woman was going beyond union contracts. Now, at this point in time, she has 3 canneries. She is indeed canning everything that doesn't move faster than she does in the San Joaquin County. Then Pearl Harbor comes. We are involved in World War II. That day, when she's recovered from the shock and the Japanese people that she so loves that works for her are taken from her, she lets the Japanese people know, you may have to go today, and it breaks my heart. But the second this thing is over, your job is held for you. And she kept that promise. But that day, she says, we're going to rip all the labels. We're going to strip the labels off our cans and make them all American. So she did. She scribbled down a little cartoon of tanks and tomatoes, and she had red, white, and blue labels. And she had the girls come in, single ladies, during Christmas vacation, because again, December 7th was when Pearl Harbor happened. And by Christmas, these gals are in there, and they called them the Floatel strippers. So they had quite a joke about that. And Tillie was now wearing pants to work, which meant ladies could now wear slacks into Floatel. However, labor was short. It was hard to get people to come in. The men were gone. The Japanese were gone. So Tillie brought in buses. Tillie brought in daycare so that people that had a difficulty getting to work didn't have to worry about it anymore. They could bring their kids. There were places to sleep at Floatel. It was kind of like Facebook. It was a whole campus of you just came and Tillie would take care of you. She developed a stamp like blue chip stamps and green stamps. Some of you remember those. Well, she had Tillie stamps where you could come in and buy products you couldn't normally get during the wartime. At which point, Tillie started thinking, let's better these products again. Let's better these products. So she starts looking at some companies are being found to have insects and other things inside the cans. So she wants to make sure that is not her. That is not Floatel. So she brings in a Class A, top of the line laboratory, the first in the food industry. And she has scientists and PhDs now working for her. And she's hiring from within and sending her people to college, to Berkeley and to University of Pacific, which was College of the Pacific at the time. And she's increasing their education on her nickel. Then she discovers that asparagus butts make penicillin. So she's doing everything she possibly can for society, for health, and for her people. Then the war's over. There's no pineapple to put in her fruit cocktail, and you have to have pineapple tidbits. You'll love this story. It's called Pineapple Pirate. Tillie goes ahead and buys two army boats and names them both the Miss Tillie 1 and the Miss Tillie 2, and she puts this is off the coast of Mexico, she puts an entire cannery on the ship. Ends up having her guys get almost busted for piracy. It's a great story. You will love that. Too much fun. Now, Tillie's doing fabulously, but she's always busy with the what next. The Pineapple Pirate thing got her into a little bit of trouble again with that darned FBI. And she sort of needed to marry Meyer Lewis, the labor guy, to help her out with some other situations. So she has a friend, and her name is Jeanette, and she is a woman of color. Now, this was not appreciated in Stockton, California. So Tillie took Jeanette and Meyer to Palm Springs, and Jeanette was basically her matron of honor, and Tillie is goofing around in her car, chauffeuring Jeanette about in Palm Springs, which was way fun for both of them. Nobody picked Tillie's friends for her. Nobody ever. Now, Tillie is being rewarded as the most famous woman in food. And she also realizes that it's tough being at the top when you don't have a role model. And she looked at, well, who am I now? I'm Tillie Lewis, and I'm president of the company. Well, she didn't think that was enough. So she thought, what is a woman boss of everything? What do I call myself? And she thought about chairwoman. And somebody said, well, you know, chairwoman is, well, less than chairman. So Tillie became chairman officially, and she just forgot about the fact that she was chairman in a dress. Now, her next what's next is Americans were getting fat. So she came up with the idea for a diet product, and she called it the Tasti-Diet. It's a long story that goes into it, but it's the first American Medical Association approved diet products in the world. The American Medical Association has actually approved and allows on the shelves. She's selling it to doctors. She's selling it to diabetics. She's selling it to high blood pressure folks. She's selling it everywhere. Now, she's gone back, as she did her whole life, to her Hollywood friends that she met at Ziegfeld. She's got Groucho Marx helping her sell Tasti-Diet. She's got Jimmy Durante, who had high blood pressure, helping her sell Tasti-Diet. She's with Doc Weist in one picture. Doc Weist is the gentleman who actually invented Tasti-Diet for her and worked for her. And they are standing together and smiling over some of the products. But Doc was really concerned about the health benefits. So he mentioned that he was concerned that African Americans in America seemed to be suffering, according to his statistics, from diabetes and high blood pressure at a much higher rate than other citizens in the United States. So Tillie hopped on a plane, and she went to Homer G. Phelps Hospital, which was one of the biggest training hospitals for African Americans in the United States, and it was in St. Louis. So she met with African American doctors and nurses and dietitians, and she gave them Tasti-Diet to help with their patients. And that went on for years. Meanwhile, she went to the baseball fields in St. Louis, and she had Ed Stanky and the Cardinals help sell Tasti-Diet. She had Rocky Marciano, the heavyweight fighter, help her sell Tasti-Diet. Now, Tasti-Diet took her from being very rich to extremely wealthy. She has hit the big time. She's doing fabulous. So she, again, looks at what else can I do for my community. Tillie Lewis becomes the first female port commissioner, seaport commissioner in the world. And there she is, standing there, helping to bring more products in to Stockton Seaport. She also drove a forklift when necessary. Something needed to be done, Tillie would do it. Tillie bought Wilson Foods and had it changed over to Tillie Lewis, and that's her posing for that photograph. And while she was making the announcement that, hi, I'm now in charge, I'm the boss, somebody raised their hand and said, you know, a lady did, my husband comes in here and gets my paycheck and spends it before I ever see it. And Tillie's mouth dropped. She said, well, why do you let him do that? And she said, well, it happens to us all. It always has. And you hear an uproar of women saying yes. Well, Tillie said, Well, that stops today, right now. Now, there was quite the hubbub from the men who thought, well, our whole lives we've been able to just get our wives' checks. But that stopped that day. And Tillie saw that throughout all of her companies, all of her business, that the ladies who had trouble speaking up for themselves, she would do it for them. Now, Tillie had been giving herself credit for things all along because nobody else would. She was not awarded a darn thing. She just wasn't. No one thought she was only a woman. But two events happened that touched her deeply, and that is the Japanese awarded her with a presentation as the great woman that she was because she kept her promise. As soon as they came back from the camps, they had their jobs. So she's presented with an honor from the Japanese in the San Joaquin County, Stanislaus area. And because she was such a force, the University of Pacific awarded her an honorary doctorate of business. And that thrilled her beyond belief. At this point in time, Tillie is now selling part of her company, Tillie Lewis Foods, to Ogden Corporation. Tillie Lewis is now the first woman to be sitting on a corporate board. The first woman. The first woman with the key to the executive room. Even the men's room, they had to make a room for her. It was quite something. So she can do more things. So she's asked by Israel, she's Jewish, she's asked by Moshe Dayan and Ariel Sharon to come to Israel and help with their growing agriculture situation. And she does exactly that, as you can see here. Hubert Humphrey, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, was a longtime Tasti-Diet customer, and he asked her if she would come to Rome and represent the United States in the Rome Global Hunger Summit. Once again, Tillie in her later years, her life changes. This is an epiphany for her at the Global Hunger Summit. She realizes with all that she's done and all she's brought to others, people are still hungry. The population is exploding out of control. So these two things, population control and hunger, global hunger, become her passions for the rest of her life. In addition to going out and speaking, she's always been the first woman to speak and give a public address to men and women about finding success through their business. Now, she sees that Stockton is hoping for culture, a little bit more culture. So she brings that. She brings theater. She pays for Beverly Sills, the opera singer, to come and sing to Stockton. She brings in pianist Van Cliburn to come and play for Stockton. She's buying artists and portraits and the arts in the community. Pretty much anybody who needed something, if they said, Mrs. Lewis, could you? She pulled out her checkbook, or she personally came to you. One gal mentioned that she was getting married in the company. She didn't have enough money to buy a dress. So Tillie called her in and she said, dear, I understand we're going shopping today. Tillie Lewis took that young lady from her secretarial pool and she spent the day and bought her entire trousseau, everything she needed to be the bride that she had hoped to be. In 1976, Life magazine named 200 women from 1776 to 1976 as the most important American women, and Tillie Lewis was there. Think about that. What a Wonder Woman. Tillie Lewis, in 1977, was giving a rip-roaring speech on National Secretary's Day. We call it Administrative assistant day now, but she's telling women, you don't have to settle to be the secretary anymore. That didn't make too many points for the bosses, but Tillie still told women, you can be anything. You can be the boss. I did it. And she explained again, like she did all over the world, to the ladies of Stockton, what they needed to do to better themselves, believe in themselves, and create a better life was just by doing it and by learning and researching and doing whatever it was that it took to bring yourself up and to be the doctor, to be the boss, to be the principal of the school, to be exactly what we see now. We see women, we have a woman vice president. My goodness, Tillie would have expected that. Now, Tillie got her first headache. Remember that gentleman that said she might get a feminine headache? She got it that day. She had a stroke, and we lost the Tomato Queen that day. Yes, Tillie Lewis was the first female captain of industry. She provided jobs. She hired based on good character, work ethic. She celebrated race. She celebrated gender. She celebrated faith, and she celebrated people with disabilities. She contributed to science and human rights, expansion of products, both globally and nationally, and her acts of philanthropy went on and on even after her death with her contributions from her will. Tillie Lewis, a real Wonder Woman. Thank you.